Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Diego Basch here, and Diego is doing a consultancy for AI and is from San Francisco and from Buenos Aires. And here we're here in Buenos Aires, going to talk about a lot about AI. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So what are you most excited about in AI right now?
So much. So I guess the fact that nobody knows where it's going, and for me, it's a sci-fi thing that I never expected to see in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that we would have, talking machines that sound like us. But mostly just, I'm curious. I want to see where it goes and what happens the next year, the year after. I'm not a doomer. I don't think anything bad. I don't think it's a high chance that anything bad's going to happen. Yeah. So I'm very excited to see if I can get a thing that's my body that helps me with my life.
Yes, yeah. It gets rid of all the boring tasks that we've spent. Because here's a question for you. Do you think that life is easier now with technology sitting here in 2024 with the promise of the personal computing industry, which you were there for a lot of it? Do you think it's now easier than it was in the 1960s, or do you think life is harder given like the same conditions for your socioeconomic and everything like that?
Well, I'm not that old, so I can't really speak about the
the 60s. Yeah.
But the 70s and 80s, I'd say in some ways it's easier. I don't know if because of AI so much. I mean, to me, the thing that made the most difference was the fact that I can find like-minded people with the internet. That didn't happen. Like, I lived here in the 80s as a teenager, and on a Friday night, I'd be bored and think, I wish I could chat with people that share my interests, but I don't know where to find them.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about the boring stuff, because there's always new boring stuff that gets invented.
New boring stuff,
which is never ends. I think it's just part of humanity, being bored, and I don't think being bored is bad.
Yeah.
But I think overall it's better now. I wouldn't want to go back to the 80s or the 90s.
You made a really good point. It's about the social networking, and that was another thing that nobody predicted in the 1990s. Was that nobody? I mean, they had the chat rooms, which I guess that kind of existed, but the degree to which you can find people who fit your interests. But do you think AI is a threat to that? Do you think we're headed for where it's like the dead internet philosophy or whatever?
I don't think it's a threat.
Yeah.
In fact, so one thing that happens now is that, I guess, increasingly so, you don't know if you're talking to a human or not.
That is a problem.
And sometimes you can tell, and you tweet and then you get a bot reply. Yeah. Okay, this is a bot. And sometimes you don't think it is. It's like, I think I'm talking to a human being. And I saw this video last night that somebody posted about some, I guess, streaming like thing where there's a bunch of AIs telling you and chatting with you, and it's an audience. So I suppose that could happen. But in turn, what that makes it is so that you are incentivized to go meet in person.
Yes.
Which for a while you didn't need to. Like, okay, nobody knows you're a dog on the internet. Yes. Okay, so you're a human being, and nobody knows you're an AI on the internet, not a person on the internet. Okay, so I guess if I want to know, you can meet people, but then at some point, hey, are you real? Of course I'm real. Okay, let's meet.
Yeah, interesting. That's the proof of human,
right? Exactly.
Is meeting in person. Because I've been trying to figure out like what happens to writing now on the internet. Because I was thinking I would do a physical newsletter, but you could just have AI build that. There's no way to tell whether writing is AI generated or not. Like, it's gone, right? Like that doesn't exist.
I think for now, yes. I think
yes.
I guess it depends on your style, right?
Okay.
If you write in a very predictable way, then I mean, you can be replaced by an AI. Yeah. But if you think about how an LLM works, right? An LLM is trying to predict things.
Yeah.
And to me, part of what makes writing good, it's where you don't know where it's going and it's unpredictable. And somebody makes like a completely unexpected pun or even a word that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's what Borges, if you've read any Borges,
interesting.
That's one of the things that makes him amazing. Like, you just don't know where he's going, and he totally surprises you with a word that an LLM might never use, or an expression.
Yeah.
Particularly, I guess, humor.
Yes. Humor.
I appreciate a lot.
And LLMs can't do it.
It's about the unexpected punchline.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, for now at least, LLMs are pretty bad at jokes. I think that eventually might be solved.
Yeah.
But there's a window now where you can write. Like I make a conscious effort to write in a way that people cannot mistake for AI, and it's getting harder.
Yeah. There's something specific around Claude that I want to talk about because Claude allows you to do styles, and with those styles, I've now been getting good writing from Claude, which is interesting. But there's a point that you made. Here in Argentina, it is one of the most creative places for language I have ever been. Lunfardo is just this ridiculously creative, complex mixture between Italian, maybe Spanish, and Argentine slang. And it's just like there's a new word I learn every day. That I've never been in a country. I speak several languages, and I've never been in a country where there's so much surprise in terms of the language. And it's funny because I worked at a company that helped OpenAI do their algorithm, and they actually hired a huge amount of Argentines to help build the RLHF. And so that's part of the reason why I got here. And so, yeah, I guess we could take that into what do you think about Argentina, where it's headed? Where will AI play a role inside of Argentina?
Oh, what a question. So where it's headed here in particular, I suppose one of the things happens here is that people have been having a hard time for a lot of past few years with unemployment, specifically. So this is not something that's been so common in the US. I mean, the US has been more full employment. So in a way, people are more used here to being less valuable to capitalism. So in that sense, it might be less of a change. I guess one thing that happens here too is that things have been very unpredictable. So when you first moved to the US, as somebody who grew up here, you notice how things are always more or less the same. And so I know there's a change from Obama to Trump, and people are like, oh no, the world is going to end, and it's basically the same. It's not like you go outside and you can tell who's in charge. And here, that's not the case. So I guess people here are usually less trying to predict the future because nobody knows.
But I feel like that gives it feels more comfortable here during this time because everyone around me is used to not predicting the future. Whereas in San Francisco, there's something else going on in San Francisco. San Francisco is, and it's different from the rest of the United States. It's like they're not predicting the future. They're trying to build the future. And also there's a lot of hype that they're creating about this predicted future. So it's really weird to be in San Francisco. So I don't like being there anymore. I like being here because I'm surrounded by people who are less reliant on predictability. And I think the United States is going to have a tough time coming up because it's just like we've been the center of the world for so long, and now things are changing. And AI is just going to continuously just get crazier and crazier. I don't know if you've been using the Claude MCP servers. Are you familiar with the Claude MCP servers?
I haven't tried it yet.
It's pretty crazy for the listeners. Basically, you give your computer access to Claude, and Claude can go manipulate your files on your computer. And then there's like a plugin that's called WCGW, I think, which means what could go wrong, which is really funny because it's like you're giving Claude access to your files and your computers, and it's pretty mind blowing what that's possible. And so there's just like every day, every week. But this would be fun to go talk about because in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, with the internet, it was kind of like that too, right? It was not many people could predict.
Yeah, I mean, so I remember a bunch of predictions that went completely wrong. Like, for example, well, some went right, and some always the case, right? People tend to forget the ones that went wrong. Some things were pretty obvious back then. Like, for example, it was clear that it was going to be like streaming and audio and all that. And it was just a matter of figuring out how, the market was going to settle so the right people would make money. So it wasn't as unsettling, I guess, as it is now.
Because the internet also didn't play such an important role in our lives, probably too.
I guess it did. But it was more like, okay, the internet is a uniting force that's going to do away with borders. That was the one that went the most wrong. So the idea was, okay, so now, and now we see now China with its own separate internet, and a bunch of countries becoming more protective of their what's happening now with TikTok and all that.
Yeah.
So that didn't go quite, but for a while, it was just like open borders, one unified world, and there was a lot of optimism around that entire thing of, it doesn't matter where you are, and there's no censorship, and the internet routes around failure, censorship is failure, so routes all that.
Whoa, interesting.
Right?
Routes around failure.
Yeah, that was, I forget who said that, but it was like, the internet sees censorship as failure and routes around it.
Yeah,
I think that was the phrase.
Whoa. And there are a whole bunch of things like that. And there's so much optimism. I remember it, that it's just like, it's only going to be good. The technology is only going to be a good. And then it changed everything in this way.
So go for it. I guess the difference was that there were those who thought, the internet is basically this force that's going to make the world better.
Yeah.
And those who downplayed it, like the famous, who was it, like, I think it was Paul Krugman who said that. The internet is going to have less impact than the fax machine or something like that.
Yeah.
There wasn't this, I guess, doomerism or pessimism. Now it's more like that.
It was ignorance. It was just ignorance. Now it's the ignorance has been replaced by doomerism.
Yeah, there was no doomerism that I can remember. It was either this is going to be amazing or nah.
Yeah.
But nobody thought, this is going to be the end of humanity because now we can connect. There was some concern about cyber war and
little tiny flavors of cyber war. Interesting.
Yeah, and then 9/11 happened, and people went back to the physical world.
Yeah.
Although it's still a concern, I guess, but not what people expected. It was going to be like a hacker-dominated world.
Yeah, let's go into that because we were talking beforehand about cybersecurity and LLMs. Like these things, you can prompt inject them, so you can put a prompt in there that will make them give you what you want. It seems like the foundational models are better at protecting against that, but it still feels like there's this threat there. Like, what are the other categories of threat when it comes to LLMs, and how is that different from traditional cybersecurity?
So one thing that I guess a lot of people don't know is that if you think about the LLM, it's the engine of the system, right? It's like thinking, I guess, car is to engine, like what you use from ChatGPT or Claude is to the LLM. The LLM is deep inside. And in essence, the LLM is a machine that predicts what comes next.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything. It's just basically a piece of data sitting on a hard drive.
Okay.
And what we interact with is a huge system that has a lot of tools, and where I don't know how much technical we want to get.
Sure.
The idea is that you have a prompt in which you are going to predict what an agent, I guess, to use that word, would do given a context.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, in this context, the agent would, search Google, or it would, open a database and write something into a database, or would call an API. So you generate all that stuff, and that's where all the security problems might arise, because all that stuff that the LLM produces is going to be picked up by some scaffolding software that's going to execute whatever comes out of the LLM.
Whoa.
Without that, the LLM is basically, it's an engine sitting on the ground. It cannot go anywhere.
Yeah, now like a GPT-2 probably, or maybe even GPT-3 was just this thing that could produce text. Or are there, and the other thing I got from what you just explained is the agents are already here. They're inside of OpenAI and they're inside of Anthropic, and they've been using agents. What they're talking about for 2025 is essentially agents that are outside of those domains, right?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at ChatGPT, it's a sort of agent, right? It's an assistant. And there's more and more stuff that it can do for you. At first, I don't remember if or when it started generating code. I think it could generate code just because it could predict anything.
3.5. I remember that very discreetly.
Yeah, and then they made it so you can copy and paste it, and then you could execute code. Just, okay, whoa. Nobody expected that they would allow code to be executed in a sandbox so quickly.
Interesting.
I mean, the idea that, generating code that you can cut and paste, that's one thing. I mean, you go run it, it's your responsibility. But they go, hey, in order to figure this out, I need to write code that's going to execute and do a thing. You could do it too, but we're going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And this might have consequences in the outside world.
Yeah.
And that seemed very scary at first.
Yeah.
That's no big deal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a big question I have. It's just like, are there consequences that we just don't know about? Because I'm not a doomerist either. I am cautious of this technology. And I think that one of the original things that I kind of bought into was creating like artificial diseases. That if the AI is powerful enough, seems like something it could help a small team of people do who have negative will. And then the other one is execution on the internet of something that's outside of human will. And how do we know that that is happening or not? Like, how do we know that the AI is not actually going out? I don't believe it's doing it, but like, how do we know that it's not doing things out there on the internet?
I guess in principle, we can't know
Yeah.
unless we see a trace of something happening that we don't expect. Like, say you gave ChatGPT access to a bunch of APIs.
Yeah.
You tell ChatGPT, hey, I need you to make a vaccine for this virus that doesn't even exist, but here's the description.
Yeah.
And it goes, okay, I'm going to do it. And it doesn't give you a trace of what it's doing.
Yeah.
It's okay, I'm going to be calling some APIs, and it calls maybe, I don't know, say there's some service, some SaaS somewhere that lets you simulate a bunch of stuff. And maybe it's limited by the fact that it's interactive and it's throttled. And it goes, okay, this is too slow. I need to fork 1,000 threads, and I need to disguise myself into a bunch of IPs. It just goes and does it and does it and does it. And then you go, here's your vaccine.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can look at what I did.
Yeah. But it could be hiding things, and the real thing would be to test whether there is some sort of trace that it messed up or something like that. But they mess up all the time, so we should be able to know.
Yeah, the reason is why would it want to hide anything? So for now, you have to train it, and I mean, right now,
the training layer, that's the subjective human, like, we want you to do this, basically.
Or you would build the UX. Like right now, for example, if you look at O1, the new, relatively new, I guess, from a few months ago. It's not new anymore. But the UX, it doesn't show you everything that the LLM is inferring.
Got it. Yes,
there's a bunch of stuff going on that maybe you could look at, and it goes like, make me some poetry that looks like, Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Okay, analyzing styles.
Yeah. And it gives you a little taste of it.
Yeah, a taste of it, and there's a bunch more that's being outputted by the LM that you're not seeing, and that's a choice. That's a choice that OpenAI made, and I think they have access, obviously, to everything that
they can see it.
Machine does.
Yeah.
So that information is somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, even if the LLM decided to, I guess, not show you as a user, the tokens are being generated, and it would have to be have to have access to the logs on the OpenAI. So it gets really convoluted.
Yeah. And we probably monitor other humans trying to do all those things as well. So we could easily monitor an AI, unless they made some really poor architecture decisions in OpenAI or something like that. Yeah,
it seems to me that if somebody wanted a stealthy AI that does horrible things, they would have to try very, very hard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So at this point, it's just the tools are not good enough to actually do it. And so one thing I wanted to that I noticed when you're talking about OpenAI hiding their processing is that Claude with the new MC server actually is really transparent, which I think they probably made as a strategic decision to be like, okay, OpenAI not so open, Anthropic wasn't so open, now they're more open, kind of thing. Because Claude is also like Claude is basically open sourced. They haven't open sourced their MCP servers, but they are not trying to gate it. They're not trying to stick it into something that they've created. They're allowing other people to use it in an open fashion, basically.
Yeah, I guess in particular, if I wanted people to give me access to the computer, I would want them to trust me.
Yeah, interesting. And that was my first question about Claude at Anthropic, is like, do I trust them? Do you trust them?
As much as I need to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know that I will give them access to my computer. I mean, to my main computer.
Yeah.
If I were building a server for a specific task for which I'm setting up a cloud instance to do a thing, sure, they can have access to that.
Yeah.
To my laptop, no.
Yeah. And that was the question. And the person who told me about it is very much into decentralized computing. And this decentralized computing was very, very private. It was called Urbit. And like that was no surveillance, no nothing, like totally encrypted and everything like that. And so that was my main question. It's like, wow, well, what am I doing by giving access? And I'm not technical, so I can't evaluate what it's doing, which is another thing we can talk about is a whole bunch of non-technical people are about to become technical. And with some interesting changes there. If there's anything you want to say, let me know.
Well, you mentioned that, and to me, that's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Because so you saw that tweet when I was basically maybe not rebutting, but kind of like I saw what Tim Urban said about humans being there's an analogy between humans and computers, and to me that was okay. This guy is trying to make, I guess, an analog between how we work and how they work.
Okay.
And if you, like me, I guess, try to understand as deeply as you
what
could,
is happening.
I guess to go in a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, go for it.
When I was growing up, I learned to code in the early 80s with a cheap home computer with 16K of RAM.
Oh, whoa.
So by the time I was ready to go to college, I knew how to code.
Yeah.
Like, all right, but this is magic. I want to understand what's happening at the lowest possible level. I mean, what's happening inside this box that takes my instructions and does something. So I know there's a microprocessor in there. I'm going to study electrical engineering because I want to get to the bottom of it. So I understood how logic gates work and silicon and solid state physics. And then, okay, this is just math. Believe us, this works because physics.
Yeah.
Are you happy? Okay. So, okay, I get it. Now I know where you're coming from. I can go back to coding.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, interesting. Wait, did you go into the math and the physics and everything like that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So essentially the path that we've seen since then is that there's abstractions upon abstractions that people have been building since the beginning of computing to make things easier and more accessible to more people. So there was a time when you had to write in machine code and you had to go, okay, I want to move this from that. This is code 67. And you had to look it up on paper. So then people came up with high-level languages like, well, at first it was just assembly, which is that in writing. And then it was, okay, something that conveys more meaning and up and up and up. And now we're getting to the point where you don't even need to think logically about what you're trying to do. You don't need to say, take this piece of information and slice it and dice it. Yeah. Like, I want this. Yeah. And we have the next piece going up in the abstraction in which you can tell the machine, make me a clone of TikTok or something like that. Yeah. And it's going to go, okay, I know how to create a UX using whatever components, and I know how to talk to a database, and I know how to run it. Here you go. Oh, this is not what I wanted. Make it blue. And so we're getting to the point where non-technical people, if they have some sense of what the architecture looks like, it's not yet ready for completely, like my mother couldn't do anything. No. But if you are a programmer or somebody who at least learned the basics of programming and can understand why things go wrong, the kind of person who could, I don't know, maybe run a server on their computer, if you could run Apache or and look at the logs, go, okay, it failed because it couldn't connect to the database. Oh, the database is not running. If that kind of person, maybe at this point, you don't need to get so deeply into understanding the nuances of code. So I see it like that. The I guess, opening of writing code or creating machines by people who otherwise would not have been able to.
Because of that curiosity thing. You have a specific curiosity thing, which I kind of have. I don't have it to the same level of detail. Like, I don't want to understand the gates and all these different things. If it comes up, I'm interested in it. But if it's not, I'm not after that. And every time I get into the coding environment, I'm filled with dread because there's so many things going on that I don't understand. And so for me, it's been totally awesome. Except for the last 2 months, I fell off the wagon for the past 2 months because I went traveling and everything like that. But now with Claude MCP servers, I'm like, okay, now I can actually go and do stuff. And I love what you said about the abstraction, because now the abstraction layer is just not abstract anymore. Is that a good way to say it?
It's so abstract. It's more abstract. Yeah. I mean, it's going up and up to the point where I'll tell you like a little story. Yeah. So when MP3s came out in the late 90s, there were no good MP3 search engines. So I figured, okay, I'm going to build one. Wow. And back in the day, there was not very much in terms of how to build a web server. So you had to do the entire thing by hand.
Wait, web server on the cloud?
No, this was on my computer that was sitting. Yeah. I was writing, this was running on my computer that was exposed to the internet.
Got it.
Connected
Okay.
To like
okay.
It wasn't a dial-up anymore. It was something, I forget what it was. I think DSL.
Yeah.
So I wrote the search engine from the ground up in C.
Whoa.
And eventually I had to take it somewhere. I couldn't run this at home.
Yeah.
So I took it to a co-location in Mountain View, and I left my computer there. And basically, it was a lot more work, and it was much harder. It took me 5 weeks of basically nonstop coding.
Yeah.
And now you could do the same thing very, very quickly because a lot of the infrastructure that I had to build already exists. Like you could use a search server that already exists. There's one called Elasticsearch.
Yeah.
And you just set it up. And then you go, okay, I need to crawl into fetch data, and you could probably get that piece too, and you could probably piece it together in a few hours.
Yeah.
So the amount of work that you have to do, I don't know. Do you remember the TV show Cosmos with Carl Sagan?
Yes.
You heard of it?
Yeah.
There's this bit where he says, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe, right? So back then, at least you had to build an oven, right? So it was a lot more work. Now you don't have to. Right? You don't have to build the oven in order to cook a search engine.
It's going back to what we started with the show, as you said, it's sci-fi. It's very sci-fi now.
Yeah.
And it took everybody by surprise. And there's going to be a lot of different surprises. The abstraction layer reminds me of a sci-fi novel. It's probably Foundation. Foundation, there's a whole bunch of them. It's also in Star Wars, the Star Wars movies, and then there's a whole bunch of books around it as well. There's one where the main Empire planet basically is just like one entire urban center basically, and they just keep on building layers and layers and layers and layers, and then if you go down to the bottom layers, you can go and explore the sewers of thousands of years ago and everything like that. Feels like that's where we are with technology, software technology. We could talk about all the other transformational technologies coming down the pipeline that are at least to the same degree as AI, if not more transformative. But let's stick with AI.
One thought that just came to me is that one of the reasons that humans need abstractions is that we have limited working memory, right? There's a limited number of things that we can hold in our brains. Like the phone numbers used to be 7 digits because that's what somebody would tell you the phone number and you would remember 7 digits. If we could remember 10,000 digits, maybe we wouldn't need so many layers of abstraction, right? You could write a sentence that would be like, 50 pages long, and that will be fine.
Yeah.
But we need to go, okay, here's a search engine, and it works like that, and I'm going to build on top of it, and I don't need to worry about we basically structure things up and up and up, so that we always deal with a hierarchy of components.
Yeah. Which is the way a civilization works too.
Right.
Like it's not just technology, that's also the way civilization works with concepts and philosophy and all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And also buildings work like that too.
Yeah.
Right?
So the higher we make it, the more power we have.
Yeah.
Because you can go, okay, I need to plan a trip.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's maybe 3 or 4 clicks, and you can plan a trip in maybe 30 minutes. Imagine planning a trip in the times of Columbus. Right.
Yeah, you got to go talk to the king.
Yeah.
And the king has all these advisors, and he's making all these high-level decisions. And there's a bunch of things going on in the kingdom that he needs to know about, but only at the high level. It's so interesting. There's abstraction, and then there's the environment. Yeah. So the abstraction is really interesting because we're just abstracting away all the complexity, as you said. Very good point about working memory. And that reminded me of the LLM too, because the LLM, you're talking with the LLM and you're giving it the context. So you need to know the context. You need to know what you want. Both things that are philosophically very challenging to do, I would say, for most people. And then there's the environment, and specifically coding environment is really interesting because now it feels like now that me trying to go into Python and understand what an array is or a list is and trying to manipulate those things, I don't have to do any of that anymore, basically. Right. But I still need to deal with the environment of where the computer sits in terms of this whole environment. And that's really complex, and it takes that working memory that you're talking about. Would you say that the programmers have a better working memory? Because when you're in your coding flow, you have to download the state of the entire application into your head, right?
Yeah, so it used to be the case that you did have to have good working memory to pretty much do anything. There's there's an XKCD for everything, and there's one in which I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this guy writing some code, and he has a bunch of state above his head floating with like flow charts, and if this happens, that happens. And then somebody says, "Hey, remember that thing?" Yeah, and the entire thing goes away. It's like, okay, where was I? And you have to rebuild that entire working memory from scratch.
Yeah.
So when you're in the zone coding, or at least that's what it was for me, you had a bunch of things that we were remembering, and the more working memory you had, the easier or the faster you could work, because you wouldn't have to slow down and go, okay, why was I doing this? Or I need to go to this other file what was it? You know it. You know that you have like 3 open files, and one is some definition, and you juggle all these things in your mind, and you're limited by how many balls you can juggle in the air at the same time. That's your working memory.
And does that still exist today?
Yeah.
For you, and how has AI changed that?
It changes in that, for one, there's less code that you even need to write. There's a bunch of stuff that you don't need to even think about. So, like, I'll give you an example. So, a few days ago, there was somebody who was telling me that some specific thing could be done using semantic search. And I was trying to explain to this person why I didn't think it would work. And then I thought, wait a minute, I don't need to explain it. I can just show it. So I wouldn't have done this 3 years ago, but I told ChatGPT, build me an example of semantic search for this specific data, and do it like this. I told it to use a very specific database, and it didn't quite work. And it didn't work because of a bunch of errors. So I said, you know what, just go one level deeper. Don't use this database. Use what they use, which is something called SQLite and an index of semantic stuff. And that worked. So I could show my friend why semantic searches were not quite retrieving what he wanted. This otherwise would have required me to build the entire thing the usual way. So I didn't need to even exercise my working memory. All I needed to remember was, okay, I'm trying to do this with this particular vector DB, and it's not working. And I know what I would do. So now there's less time spent coding things that have been done a million times. And there's less boilerplate and more remembering the problem. And I think for some reason, when you're thinking about a specific problem in the real world, there's less of a need for working memory, because you're mostly thinking about human issues. Right? You're not thinking so much about things where when you're coding and it's you on the computer, the limit is your working memory.
And because you're dealing with this machine that's artificially created and has this complex thing that hasn't been all solved, like all the abstraction hasn't been abstracted away. But with a human being, we've got so many layers of like cultural abstraction, right? Because there's so many things going on right now that we don't need to think about because we share a same language and do all these different things.
For example, say a lawyer tells you, I have all the Constitution and a bunch of other stuff. And I can't find what I want. Okay, what do you want to do? I don't really want to hire these guys. Okay, we can work with that. We don't need to go much deeper than that.
Yes. Interesting. And now coding is moving the same way. And I love what you said about designing the educational resource right there, because that really feels like, for me, there's this debate in artificial intelligence about augmentation versus a wholly separate intelligence, right? And at this moment, it feels like augmentation, pure augmentation. Like my educational process, it's basically what I always wished for, which is a private tutor who's on 24/7. And that's just like mind blowing, because now I can go, and if I'm learning the language, I can go get Claude, go get ChatGPT, go get whatever, or even build it on my API now of a particular way that I can test myself in all these different ways. And it's just like, it's so crazy. It's so science fiction.
Language is an awesome example. I love language.
So let's go into it.
So some people say that nobody will ever need to learn languages anymore, because you can have like an AI translator that's going to be you're like a personal interpreter and all that. And to me, that's terrible, because obviously there's something to human communication in real life when you see the words coming out of the other person.
Yeah.
That cannot, if it's mediated by an interpreter, yeah, you can communicate, but there's something lost in translation, obviously. And that's always going to be the case, even if it's time. I mean, your lips are not saying what the other person is hearing, and maybe it's not quite the same thing. So I don't imagine that it's going to be a point in never, or it's going to be solved where, you know, I need to learn a language ever again. Right? You're going to be different. You're going to be an Argentine if you have a machine that speaks like me or like somebody else. The people there. But in other areas, that might be true.
What do you mean?
So the thing that kind of worries me a bit is that. So I read this article where somebody talked about how in Nigeria a bunch of kids learned from ChatGPT and it was super, super efficient. But then I was thinking, so wait a minute, what the AI is teaching these people, say it's math or how to do, spreadsheets, the AI could do itself. So
you were teaching them how to become redundant.
Yeah, exactly. So what if the AI is teaching people things that basically are going to have no value because the AI itself can do it better?
Yeah, this gets into the primary question that I'm not a doomer, but I am cautious of the dependencies that everyone is building, that I'm building, that sounds like you're building too with the coding. Because you say it, actually, that's a question I wanted to ask you is like, how has it changed your coding ability? Do you feel like you're getting worse at coding? But we'll put a pin in that one because it's really interesting, the dependencies, because we can't live without dependencies, as we're talking about with culture and language and buildings and all that. We're just totally dependent on our environment and other people. But with the AI, it feels like that dependency is challenging for human beings, particularly for young kids, right? Like, because young kids are going to grow up with this technology and it'll do everything they want. And what do they lose as human beings? Yeah.
You know, you like sci-fi.
Yeah.
Do you know the River World series?
No. Okay.
So the idea was that there's this world where everybody who ever lived in the world is born and they have their body of when they were 25. And there's like Napoleon and Julius Caesar and Einstein and everyone. And they're all basically naked and there's just raw materials. So it's like a video game. And they start rebuilding everything from scratch. So the question is, who knew what, and how fast can they rebuild civilization, and what do they do, and how do they interact? So you have Julius Caesar going, oh, so you guys know how to build machines that can fly? Great, we can.
Yeah, interesting. I can get a legion of army or something like that.
Yeah. Oh wow, you guys have submarines, amazing. And so it basically explores the interaction of people from all periods of history and how they would.
Oh, brilliant. That's really interesting.
So, I mean, the thought that I was having was, at any point in time, we don't know, like almost nobody knows everything that it would take to reboot the world. So how deep do we need to go? Like how many layers down would be reasonable to know? Like, okay, so
interesting.
I'm worse at coding because of AI, right? A little worse. I'm coding less. I'm not starting like a project from scratch. I'm not going, main, blah, blah, blah anymore. But I know how to do it. And a bunch of people who learn to code I guess pretty much nobody who learned to code in the past 15 or 20 years started with assembly language or machine code.
Do people still know? I'm sure some random people know how to do it.
I guess if you study computer science, you probably need to know how memory is set up and what it means to poke bytes around. But maybe you don't need to know what's happening at the silicon level, right? In computer science. In electrical engineering, yes, you still need to know that. So, but eventually you forget those things because you don't use them anymore. You know that you once, like what happened to me was, I once understood well enough to pass the class, I guess, how a transistor works at the physical level, the current, whatever, how I would set up. So I knew it once. If I need to go back to that, I'm sure the knowledge is there somewhere, and I could probably get back up to speed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that gives you some assurance.
Yeah, interesting.
That
Yeah,
it's
how
not,
quickly you can regain the lost knowledge.
Yeah. So the question is, if at some point something huge fails.
Yeah.
So say, I don't know, for some reason there's some kind of catastrophe and there's no more electricity for a while. Can we rebuild? How fast?
And that question I'm less optimistic about.
Yeah.
I feel like we, at the programming example, I'm very optimistic that
Yeah.
somebody can go in there and figure it out, particularly because you have an LLM now, which knows all of that stuff. So it can teach you how to do all that stuff. But the civilization, that feels like the dependency that's more scary. Like the Microsoft, remember like 6 or 9 months ago, the Microsoft kind of blew up and stopped all air travel for a long time. Like that. I mean, I guess they fixed it, you know.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of money lost. Yeah.
It's kind of surprising in a way. So I guess one thing that people have been expecting since the globalization of computing and everything being interconnected was there's going to be like a big one, like a big earthquake.
Y Combinator, like Y2K.
Yeah, something like that has never happened so far.
Yeah.
But I mean, COVID has never happened.
Yes.
9/11 had never happened.
Yeah.
And it
It
could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, everything could be out for a week.
Yeah.
And then there might be a reckoning of, hey, we became too loose, and the world is too flimsy, and
but it's pretty. But it is pretty resilient.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole global thing is pretty resilient.
Yeah, I think it's more resilient than I would have predicted for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It seems like a miracle that things work and nothing breaks all the time, knowing how buggy software is and how bad we are.
Yeah. Well, let's go into that. You were there. You were in the San Francisco early 2000s. That was also the rise of the sort of singularity, the Singularity Institute and the Singularity philosophy. What's your take on the Singularity and those guys? Do you believe it? Do you not believe it? Somewhere in the middle?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So I don't believe in fast takeoff because I think the bottleneck there is physics. I don't think, it seems to me that people who come from the theory side of things are quick to leave a bunch of things as an exercise to the reader that will be really hard in real life. They haven't really struggled with running into, it's like sometimes in software you go, okay, this is going to take me maybe a week, and then everything goes fine. Then you find a thing that it turns out that it's going to take a month or more. You just don't know, and you eventually backtrack and okay, I can't do this. I thought I could. And there's a lot of that when you read a book like by Nick Bostrom about super intelligent, he has no idea that even exists. He goes, okay, everything goes smoothly and the computer takes off, and that happens. So that doesn't worry me that much. And I think, there's an exponential, but there's limits that make it plateau. We don't know what they are. I think physics is a bit underrated. And maybe the bottleneck is underrated. Maybe intelligence is not the absolute bottleneck. Maybe if you have like the most intelligent thing that can exist, it will be okay. This is what I can do, and then the rest is just it's gonna take time.
Which is already happening. It's been 2 years now, and they keep on talking about AGI. Do you think OpenAI is talking their own book when they talk about AGI? Do you think it's a hype, more marketing? Do you think it's more marketing than it is?
Well, judging by the past, it would seem that way. Because they've been doing that since the beginning, and it works to their advantage. So my odds would be like that's 70-80% the case. Of course, I can't be sure. They might have something that's I guess a phase change from what they have now, but then what it is or what it means, I don't know. I don't think it's the sci-fi monster that we should be afraid of. It might be significantly better, but at the same time, if I had to guess, the main reason they don't release things is because the cost is so insane that they do the math and go, okay, this is amazing, but we have to charge $5,000 a month for it. We might as well just downplay it and be mysterious because nobody's going to really buy it.
Oh man, it's so interesting, the game theory on it. Because then there's the nuclear power issue as well, which relates to Argentina too. I don't know if you're familiar that the new government here is planning on building a 4-megawatt nuclear reactor by 2030, and it's related to AI as well. but yeah, it's really interesting. But even if we don't expect there to be AGI or anything like that, there's so much has happened over the last 2 years that there is a huge amount that needs to be integrated within, that doesn't need to be integrated with society. That's parts of society will integrate with. Let's go back to the question of Argentina. Like, do you think, like, when will Argentina become an AI enabled economy? I guess we should back up to like, what is an AI enabled economy as well? It's a good question for the future. Yeah.
What is an AI enabled economy?
Yeah.
I guess it will be an economy in which most of the rote work that requires humans no longer needs to be done by humans. Like nobody needs to do anything mechanical again.
Whoa.
And like to me, it will be a situation in which there's two kinds of work. One is basically manual work that needs to be done by humans because robots are lagging.
Yeah.
So you need to move things around. You need to, go deliver a pizza. Okay, maybe eventually these things are, but I think that's gonna take a while.
Yeah.
And then the other work is mostly human to human. Like
yep.
You are doing a podcast
Yep.
and you are trying to reach humans, maybe also AIs,
but
mostly for now.
AI audience. Oh, interesting. That brings up a keep on going.
Yeah, but essentially, like the humans want to do things that are interesting to other humans. We need to be acknowledged and we need to be liked. And so to me, an AI enabled economy would be one in which we mostly worry about
human relationships.
Because the rest is solved by AI and we can offload all the stuff. Like nobody today, almost nobody compared to 200 years ago, works directly on food production, right? Mm-hmm. So now we have I don't know what to call it, but like no longer food dependent economy, mm-hmm. in which I don't work, I have no idea how food is made. Well, I do, but I've never touched it. Most people never have. So that would be an AI enabled economy, one in which most people do not need to worry about, moving information around. And that's basically done.
So many jobs are moving information around. Oh man, there's a bunch I wanted to say there. The AI enabled economy.
Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina. Yeah.
It's hard to say whether. So things are so unpredictable here compared to the U.S. That the same way it happened with crypto, that Argentina became like an early adopter of crypto. It could be that too, or it could be the opposite. It's really hard to know. Mm-hmm. So I don't know which way I would bet.
I feel like there's so many people here who have worked for startups and are familiar with startups and have money from crypto as well. That there is a special set of circumstances here, not to replace San Francisco. Like I don't think replacing San Francisco ever works. But who knows? But it feels like there's something special going on here in terms of the creativity, the AI, and the crypto stuff, and the people working for startups remotely. Like it just feels like it's like sort of there's been a download of what goes on in San Francisco here in ways that don't really exist in like Colombia, for example. I mean, there are pockets of it in Colombia and stuff like that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, this place is interesting in that, since the beginning of the 20th century, I guess, Argentinians were trying to look up to the center of the world, so to speak, and trying to interpret Europe and the US. And it didn't work out very well for most of the 20th century.
Whoa.
I guess at least the second half.
Interpretation, you mean like there's a special set of things that due to the history of this place and they were looking at Europe, they were looking at the US and trying to interpret it in a way that would fit in an Argentine context.
Right. I mean, if you walk in downtown Buenos Aires, you're gonna see a bunch of parts that look like Spain or like France. Like there's Recoleta that looks distinctly French. And then Avenida de Mayo that looks more Spanish.
Oh, interesting.
And you can see that, especially if you've been to Paris, you've been to Madrid. Okay, this is Madrid right here. Come on, this could be Madrid. And no, this could be like someplace in Paris. So there was a force trying to make this place mostly European, and so there's always been this idea that this tension between Argentina and other Latin American countries in which Argentines think of themselves as like, different semi-European. And of course, there's always been a lot of interest in technology here. since I can remember,
Yeah.
at least.
Nuclear power. There's nuclear power here. There's satellites. There's huge education infrastructure. There's biotech here as well.
Yeah. So there's an opportunity now.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Like I would not even try to predict anything about this country.
Which is funny because that's business, right? Part of business is predictability, particularly the finance side. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the things. You were saying that in San Francisco, early on, that everybody's trying to predict anything, and it gets a bit tired.
Yeah.
And sometimes people get too wrapped up in
the predictions. Man.
Because obviously, if you can predict, if you can make and turn your idea into a prediction.
Yeah.
The Alan Kay phrase, right? The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Yeah.
And you don't see that here. People just go with the flow because that's the way it's always been.
Yeah, interesting. That's probably why I feel more and more relaxed here. Because I don't feel relaxed when I'm in San Francisco. It feels like manic and crazy and stuff like that. Do you feel that as well?
I do, yeah. That's part of the reason that I'm here now.
Yeah.
So it's a bit tiring being in a place so intense, especially when no longer in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah, interesting.
When you don't have the energy.
Yeah.
Because it's basically like the Premier League of business and technology.
Yeah. And it's still good for that. Like I still suggest people to go there for that reason.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth. I can't say what it's gonna be like in the next few years.
Yeah.
But back in the day when I went there, you had to be crazy.
Yeah.
And I didn't move to the US with the idea of necessarily staying.
Yeah.
But when I started getting interviews from companies in the Bay Area, I thought, okay, I will have to be nuts to miss out on this.
Yeah. Right at the beginning of one of the waves. There have been many waves there.
Yeah, it might be the same now. I can't say.
Yeah,
maybe not.
Yeah. But what do you miss about? Because I miss it so much. I remember the first time I went to San Francisco and feeling the energy of San Francisco in probably like 2003 or 2002 or something like that. And it was just this beautiful, weird energy. And that's why I like Buenos Aires also has that weird energy, a different weird energy. But what is the kind of, what do you think San Francisco lost in that time period?
So I guess the thing that it lost was the fact that you had to be there if you wanted to work in tech. And now you don't.
Yeah.
So what you see now is the revolving door effect, where a bunch of people come by and they get what they need and then they leave. Mm-hmm. So it's harder to form longer lasting working relationships with people. So for me, for example, I was part of a diaspora of this company that used to be a search engine before Google. And then, of course, Google killed every other search engine. But we all stayed in touch for maybe 20 years after that. Wow. So maybe somebody would start a company and then the old gang would reunite. And I don't know if that's happening so much anymore. But it was always basically the usual suspects hanging out, at least between, 98 and maybe 2015, before COVID. And then COVID made it so that a bunch of people went, hey, why am I paying the price to live here? I can go, I can stay at Google and work from, the middle of nowhere. I have a friend who did that, who, he bought some land in the middle of Nevada. And okay, I never really wanted to be near people. So that's kind of a bit lost for now. And those people, even if they didn't necessarily like people, it was nice to have them around. Yeah,
interesting. And that's another theme that definitely still exists. I just went back recently, and the sort of autist people who don't want to be around other people but do go to meetups. It's really funny. That still exists, and you can definitely go.
Yeah, but now you mention it, everyone in SF is much more social and outgoing than I remember.
That's another interesting point. Yes.
Yeah, it used to be like there were a lot of introverted people that just had to show up.
Yeah.
And like me. And some of them, they couldn't really work. There was one guy back at this company in the 90s who he mostly worked from home. He was like so weird. Like he had like a tiny portable keyboard thingy. I don't even know what it was called, but it was like a glasses case that would unfold and he would be anywhere, and he had cell service. This was 99 or 2000.
Wow, one of the original remote workers.
Yeah, not even a BlackBerry. Yeah. This guy was like super, Spectrum-y.
Yeah. But he did something really important for the company.
Yeah.
Right? What did he do?
Yeah, he did ops. So it was basically keeping everything running.
Yeah.
So, but he was one of the only people who could afford to not be around. Whoa. And now a lot of people don't need to be around. So there's more of a self-selection of really outgoing, verbal people that I notice when I go to a meetup. Everybody talks much more and everybody's much more likable.
Yeah, the Bitcoin meetup in Santa Clara in 2018 was still not very likable. It's such a weird place.
Yeah, but now if you go to an AI meetup in SF, everybody's like a
yes, at the AI meetup, yes, for sure. And the strangest thing that started probably around 2010 was the collective housing, because it was almost like the 1960s. It was almost like they were trying to recreate the 1960s, but instead of the 1960s being like a organic thing, it was like related to getting jobs in technology, which is really weird. I mean, there are authentic people who are doing that. I'm not trying to question the whole thing, but a large part of it was like, where can I get into the right collective house so I can get the right job at Airbnb? It's really weird. It's a really, really weird phenomenon. But I guess those people are probably going to win from the AI thing, right? Do the autists lose out from AI? Is it going to, like, what actually, this is a question I wanted to ask you throughout this whole thing, is like, what is your take on the Salesforce not hiring any more engineers, Meta not hiring any more engineers? Do you think that that's real, or yeah?
So it's hard to know. So on one hand, that's basically it's marketing, obviously, because if you're working on AI, you want to at least give the impression that it's working out for you, right? We're building things, and they work so well that we can actually afford to not hire more people. But also, they have a bunch of people that every company is always, basically doing a house cleaning after a while, where they get rid of the people who, for whatever reason, are not motivated, performing. That's just normal. And maybe they were not going to hire anyone anyway because they didn't need to.
And this is a really good prediction to check on 2 years from now. It's like whether Meta and Klarna and all those other companies, and this goes back to the thing, is just nobody pays attention to predictions. Nobody follows up on predictions, basically.
And the other thing is that this is something that people don't talk about that much. But when I work for big companies, I always noticed that there were people that you knew didn't need, like entire departments that didn't need to even exist.
And once you hire somebody, it's very different.
But that's because there's an incentive. I mean, there's always the empire builder at these companies. I want to create reasons to, manage a lot of people because that's how I'm cool. And companies like those people, and shareholders put up with that. I mean, if somebody says, we're going to be doing all these things, and I need 50 more heads. And they can convince the executives, who obviously want the company to grow because they want to be more powerful, and they want to have a company with 50,000 people. And if they can sell that to the shareholders, and if the company is not losing money, and if everyone does it, everyone is happy. So, but then Elon Musk comes and shows that if you really need to get rid of some people, things don't stop functioning. So there's this counter movement. So maybe you can be in between and go, you know what? We're not going to fire anyone. We're not going to fire anyone either. And we're just going to say that this is AI. And we don't need to do anything.
This is a great point. The bureaucracy really gets, I predict that we're going to get into a bureaucracy AI arms race, where the bureaucracies will try to stop the AI from being able to do all the functional work that paper pushers who have their jobs and are trying to protect their jobs are doing. Which just put a burden on anybody who's going into the bureaucracy. I do think that will happen, mostly because I'm so tired of doing bureaucracy, and I'm going to use the AI to do it. So the last question, what are you working on in terms of your consulting? What are you guys focused on?
So what we do is mostly whenever somebody is trying to integrate an LLM into a piece of software to maybe increase the capabilities of the piece of software, not just do a chatbot, but go, okay, we want the LLM to do stuff in the real world. So for example, suppose you wanted to build an assistant that is going to be able to, the obvious trite examples, book a trip or reserve a venue for an event, or go buy stuff for you, right? There's a bunch of dangers when you do that. And that they might be tricked maybe by another AI into buying things they don't need, or think more than they should, or So there's a bunch of risks in enabling an AI to interact with the human world, because they don't have a bunch of things that we assume are obvious in human beings. Like, for example, suppose I told you, go buy a certain thing, and you go buy 10,000 times the thing, you get fired, right? And you're accountable. And the computer's like, it doesn't even have mistakes. That's not a big deal. So we are trying to guide people who are building these things into not making mistakes that might cost them insane amounts of money or cost them like legal trouble. So it's a different kind of security. It's not security in the sense of, hackers are trying to exploit your software, and once you gain users, somebody's going to get into your database and steal your password. It's more like, you want to make sure you don't enable a machine to do really awful things in the world, or to be duped by either humans or another machine into things that have side effects and consequences. As long as you're only allowing people to converse with a chatbot and use public information, there's not much of a risk. I mean, the chatbot might say something offensive, but nothing serious is going to happen. But if your chatbot, is going to book a flight and it ends up buying, the most expensive ticket because of an error, and there was a ticket, buy me a business class ticket to go to this place. Okay, it's $100,000. Because I bought it. Or
this is really interesting because it's agents. It's directly related to the agent sort of narrative at the moment, and it's so funny because I went to the Cerebral Valley in San Francisco a couple months ago, the big AI conference there, and everybody was like, agents are coming, agents are coming, agents are coming. Nobody answered what is an agent. Like, nobody knew what it was. Like, it's just constantly like, oh yeah, they're here, they're billions of dollars, and there's nothing here. And so, like, what is an agent? An agent is something that you give will to do something on its own, and then it goes autonomously does that, right? And there's so many traps there, right?
Yeah. Essentially, an agent is a bot that in principle can make decisions that you didn't anticipate. To me,
no oversight.
A bot was, okay, you write a bot that's going to listen in on Discord, and whenever somebody says certain things, I go, no, this is wrong. This word is not allowed, you get banned. So you know the logic of that. It's not going to go in a diatribe or something.
But when conspiracy theory bot.
Yeah, exactly. And like you have like very simple rules that you can spell out about, okay, there's a list of words that people shouldn't say on Discord. And whenever I see one of these words, this person gets, sent to the penalty box for 1 hour. That's what the bot does. That's a bot. An agent would be a thing that is going to reason about something. Okay, your job is to keep the peace here and figure it out. And then it might come up with things that you never expected. It has, in a way, reasoning and decision power.
Reasoning and will. That I didn't get that until just now, is the connection between the reasoning and the will. And that we're giving these things the will, and obviously human beings, I love how there's these philosophical questions that philosophers have been asking that are now becoming like computer science questions. Which is really interesting. But we'll leave that question for another episode. How can listeners find out more about you and your work?
So I guess I'm a lot on Twitter. They can find me at D as in Diego, Basch, B as in boy, ASCH at Twitter. And that's mostly it. Like, from there, you can follow the path and find me everywhere else. I'm D Basch basically everywhere, YouTube.
And I'll put it in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stuart.